We're so pleased you can join us for this webinar about the Stevens Initiative's 2020 grant competition. We'd like to start with a general overview of the topics we'll cover today, as you can see in this agenda slide. After a brief introduction to the Stevens Initiative, we'll give an overview of the key features of the grant competition, including the types of grants offered and who's eligible to apply. We will explain some of the key parameters for grantee activities, and then we'll talk about the application process and the selection criteria. We'll briefly describe a few key points related to the budget and compliance. Those interested in applying can attend a second webinar on August 29th to learn much more about budget and compliance expectations for this grant competition, and we'll share some of the details about that webinar later in the presentation. We'll also list a few other ways applicants can get more support. And finally, we'll take some time to answer your questions. If you have a question at any point during today's webinar, please type it in the Q&A box here in the Zoom video conference. And I'm sorry that I forgot to say it at the very first thing. My name is Henry Shepard, and I'm an Assistant Director of the Stevens Initiative. The Stevens Initiative aims to make international learning experiences available and accessible to an unprecedented number of young people through virtual exchange that connect youth in the United States with youth in the Middle East and North Africa, or MENA region. The initiative is a lasting tribute to Ambassador Stevens, who dedicated his career to building bridges between people in the United States and the MENA region. The initiative was conceived and developed in close partnership with the family of Ambassador Stevens and was launched in 2015. The initiative is sponsored by the U.S. Department of State, with funding provided by the U.S. government and administered by the Aspen Institute. Additional funding is provided by the Bezos Family Foundation and the governments of Morocco and the United Arab Emirates. While we don't hold a strict definition of what is and what is not virtual exchange, we think the following text shown on the screen here serves as a good guide for the field. We believe virtual exchange uses technology to connect people for education and exchange. Virtual exchange programs typically serve young people. Many virtual exchange programs are international, connecting participants in different countries to help them gain global competence among other knowledge, skills, and abilities. We think that virtual exchange often involves sustained communication and collaboration, either synchronously in real time or asynchronously over a period of time. Many practitioners believe facilitation by prepared, responsible adults, often but not always educators, is an important component of many successful programs. And virtual exchange can be integrated into many different subject areas, from the sciences to the social sciences to business and many other fields. The Stevens Initiative seeks to build the field of virtual exchange by working in three main areas or pillars. The first is grant making. The initiative runs grant competitions every 2 years, where interested educational institutions or other institutions can submit an application to administer a virtual exchange program connecting youth in the United States with youth in the Middle East and North Africa. We try to be a knowledge hub, and through these programs, we collect data, share best practices, develop resources to help grow the field. We also try to conduct advocacy. We try to raise awareness of the field and try to bring more people to the field as champions to bring funding and to bring an understanding that this is a growing field that can reach many more young people. I want to turn to give an overview of this grant competition. We'll start off by talking about the three types of grants. The grants are scaling grants, seeding grants, and efficiency grants. The first two listed here, scaling and seeding, are familiar from past competitions. Scaling grants are larger grants for organizations that have experience conducting high-quality virtual exchange and are seeking to further expand their program. Seeding grants are smaller grants for organizations that are seeking to grow and improve an early-stage program. And for the first time, we're also offering what we are calling efficiency grants, which challenge applicants to conduct an effective virtual exchange program that can operate at a substantially lower cost per participant. We'll say a bit more about the rules for each of these later in the presentation. All of the details about these different grant types and the parameters of each type are listed in the call for proposals on SurveyMonkey Apply, which we'll talk about much more later in the presentation. Again, let's talk about some of the key features of these different grant types. The grant duration for scaling grants is 27 months, or a little bit over 2 years, running from April 1st, 2021 until June 30th, 2023. Seeding and efficiency grants are a little bit over 1 year, so starting on the same date, April 1st, 2021, and ending 1 year earlier, or June 30th, 2022. The grants vary substantially by size. Scaling grants are for between $250,000 and $750,000 over that whole period of 27 months. Seeding grants are between $50,000 and $100,000 over 15 months, and efficiency grants are also between $100,000 and $400,000 over the same 15 months. All three types of proposals have the same deadline, October 13th of this year at 5 p.m. US Eastern Time. Applying organizations must be based in the United States or in the Middle East and North Africa region. US-based applicants must be tax-exempt nonprofit organizations, including educational institutions. MENA region-based applicants must be nonprofit organizations, including educational institutions, that can demonstrate current in-country registration. Other organizations are not eligible to apply, though they may be included as subawardees or contract recipients. Staff of all organizations should be proficient in English and able to file reports and conduct evaluations in English as well as in Arabic or French as appropriate. Past and current recipients of Stevens Initiative grants or U.S. Department of State funds are eligible to submit applications if the proposed work is different from previously or currently funded activities and does not involve any overlap in staff, curriculum, participants, or other key features. We realize that there might be many questions about that criterion or about that attribute, and we look forward to answering your questions probably best by email because they often relate to the specifics of each organization. In terms of the organization of the location of activities, activities must be conducted in both the United States on one hand, and on the other hand, in one or more of the countries listed on this slide. These countries fall under the Bureau of Near Eastern Affairs at the U.S. Department of State. Programs involving refugees from these countries who are currently in countries not listed above are also eligible. And again, if you have any questions about that, we recommend you reach out to the Stevens Initiative directly. The age range that corresponds to elementary school, middle school, high school, undergraduate, and graduate education levels, including young professionals under the age of 35, are eligible for Stevens Initiative programs as the youth participants. The Stevens Initiative has priorities to reach a variety of different US and MENA region participant groups. Please see the call for proposals for much more details, and I think my colleague Kyle may speak to that a little bit as well later in the presentation. We've also established some parameters for the appropriate number of contact hours in any of the proposed programs. We use the term contact hours in this competition to refer to the number of hours the typical youth participant would spend on live or synchronous communication, as well as asynchronous communication with their international peers in the program. For example, if US and Egyptian participants in a 4-week-long program met for 1 hour each week via video conference and also had an hour each week of exchanging written messages, then the number of contact hours would be 8 hours per participant, of which 4 would be synchronous and 4 would be asynchronous. For this competition, we define cost per participant as being the total amount being requested by the applicant divided by the total number of US and MENA region young people who would meaningfully participate in the program. So you can see on this slide the parameters that we've specified for the contact hours and cost per participant for these types of grants. For contact hours, for scaling and seeding, it's between 10 and 50 hours over somewhere between 2 to 16 weeks of activities. And for efficiency grants, it's at least 3 hours of contact over at least 2 days and up to 1 month. The cost per participant ranges are, for scaling grants, between $100 and $300 per participant. For seeding grants, between $300 and $500 per participant, and for efficiency grants, under $100 per participant. We expect grantees to carry out work in several related areas related to the virtual exchange program. These include telling participants they are part of the Stevens Initiative and where the initiative gets its funding, and sharing participants' information with the initiative so the participants can be invited to join the Department of State International Exchange Alumni Network, supporting some form of alumni engagement, conducting some public communications, and participating in the initiative's monitoring and evaluation process. Grantees are also expected to submit program and financial reports, typically quarterly. Many more details about all of these expectations are listed in the call for proposals. There are a few program types the initiative is particularly interested in seeing among the applications. Those include programs that include open enrollment, meaning young people can independently sign up to participate without necessarily being involved in the virtual exchange through their coursework or academic institution. Programs that are conducted mainly on mobile phone applications and devices, or programs that center on pro-social or social impact video games that also include a substantial virtual exchange component. Addressing one or more of these priorities is optional and not required for any applicant. Applicants don't get a specific number of selection criteria points for including these features, but the initiative does aim to include programs with these attributes in the ultimate pool of grant recipients. The initiative is offering some additional funding to applicants who are interested in participating in a research project as part of their grant. The applicant would submit a normal proposal and would also fill out and upload an additional supplement form and an additional page of the budget template when applying. This is only available to scaling applicants and is optional and does not give the applicant any additional selection criteria points for the main application. The program attribute variation supplement is designed to give an organization funds to run an additional version of their program that is identical to the main version aside from one key difference. The supplement can fund one of two differences or variations. On one hand, the applicant can vary the dosage or contact hours that I described earlier, or the applicant can conduct a version of their program that involves only synchronous or asynchronous communication, and also conduct a version of the program that involves the other type of communication. Between 150 and 200 young people would need to be meaningful participants in the alternate version of the program to qualify for the supplement, and organizations can apply for between $50,000 and $100,000 to do this supplemental work. I'd like to turn it over to my colleague Kyle Kassler to talk about the application and selection process.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Henry, for that introduction. Yeah, I want to cover a couple of important items around the application and selection process, including our application platform, the resources we provide, and the selection process. As I move through this section, I will refer often to our call for proposals. This is a very detailed document or call, but we have tried to do what we can to set applicants up to create the best proposals possible. This is just a reminder to please, if you have questions as we go through, to submit the questions to the Q&A function below. So for the first slide, I want to talk about the selection criteria. Specifically, what are the criteria used during our review process? We've established 8 criteria listed on this slide for this competition that will be used to evaluate proposals. The application was created in a way that, through an applicant's answers, reviewers are able to assess a proposal through the lens of these 8 factors. Each criterion listed is included in our call for proposals with detailed explanations. In that section, we include how many points each criterion is worth out of a total of 100 possible points. The point scales for individual criteria vary depending on the grant type of the proposal, whether it's scaling, seeding, or efficiency. In the call for proposals, we also include illustrative questions for each criterion that should help applicants understand the context of these criteria, allowing them to create the best proposal that they can. In the next 2 slides, I want to briefly review 2 of these 8 criteria in more detail. For the criteria, content or plan for activities, we are looking at what participants would learn and how during their virtual exchange. It's important to us to make it very clear that all topics or content areas for virtual exchanges are welcome. Some that we think are suitable and priorities for these programs include those listed here: technology and computing, world affairs and global studies, business and entrepreneurship, language learning and practice, public health, and/or the coronavirus pandemic. Again, on the call for proposals, we go into more detail for each priority listed here, detailing how we think this priority is directly related or to virtual exchange programs that might apply for this competition. Proposals should clearly show how grantees, through their virtual exchanges, would create and implement a plan for activities that will foster collaboration and dialogue over a sustained period of time, and also empower participants to learn not only about the main topic or content area, but also to gain or develop other skills like communication, collaboration, or other global competencies. In the next slide, the second criteria I want to review is the participants criterion. This refers to who are the participants in the virtual exchange program and what communities do they come from. In addition to having participants in the appropriate geographic locations and age ranges indicated on the call for proposals, proposals should also indicate a participant plan that reaches diverse participants, including those groups listed here, including women and girls, underserved youth whose access to international exchange has been limited, refugees, people with disabilities, and minority groups. Applications will be scored with special attention paid to how the general participant description meets these requirements, and also, or sorry, not these requirements, these priorities, and also how closely the proposal meets the initiative's priorities for participants in the United States and in the MENA region. Proposals can receive additional points for addressing the following priorities in their proposal regarding young people whose access to exchange has been limited. U.S. priorities include serving students from minority-serving institutions at the higher education level, or students from higher education institutions with a high percentage of Pell Grant recipients, and/or students from Title I school-wide program schools, and/or other marginalized youth as specified by the applicant. Our MENA priorities are also listed on the call for proposals, but are specifically refugees from MENA countries, students from institutions where English is not the main language of instruction, young people from Iraq, Libya, Syria, including Syrian refugees, Yemen, and the Palestinian territories. Applicants will be asked to state clearly in their proposal whether their planned participants meet these priorities, and if they do, how they will commit to serving these participants during the grant's period of performance. Grantees that propose to meet these priorities will be held accountable to meet their commitments over the course of the grant. You can read more about these priorities and how applications will be scored for this criterion on the call for proposals. Now I want to speak very quickly about the process for applying for funding. Applications may only be submitted online through the initiative's online application system on SurveyMonkey Apply. Clicking the links on any of our announcements or outreach materials should take you to that page. Applications that are sent through email will not be considered. For a proposal to be considered, applicants must complete the application form in its entirety. This includes multiple questions and all the information requested. Versions of the application are available in the call for proposals on SurveyMonkey Apply. Applicants must also submit the application form. It's important to make sure that your proposal is fully submitted. You should, at submission, receive an email confirmation from the SurveyMonkey Apply platform. If you don't receive an email confirmation, check your application or email us at stevens.initiative@aspeninstitute.org. Applicants must also include all required uploads, including a budget, budget narrative, timeline, partnership table, financial statements, and a foreign or domestic subrecipient questionnaire. Each grant type has unique versions of these requirements, which are all listed on the call for proposals and in the application. Examples of each of these requirements are available for download for your reference on the call for proposals. After submitting your application, you might wonder what the next steps are. So let's go ahead and review this really quickly. So what happens after applying? After applications are submitted, a number of processes begin. First, an independent review committee scores applications to help inform funding decisions. Applications are vetted by initiative partners, including the US Department of State and some US embassies. Regarding notification, specific dates have not been set at this time for notification about decisions. However, we can say that unsuccessful applicants will be notified by the end of 2020 if possible, and applicants receiving a conditional approval will be notified of funding decisions by early 2021 to begin the negotiation and contracting phase. The final cohort of grantees from this competition are expected to be announced in spring 2021. I want to turn it over to my colleague, Andy Schaefer, to talk briefly about budgeting.
Thanks, Kyle. I'm just going to very briefly touch on budgeting. As we mentioned earlier, we're hosting a separate webinar on budgets and compliance for this grant competition on August 27th. We might have misspoken about that earlier, but it is on August 27th at 12 p.m. US Eastern Time or 9 a.m. Pacific Time. If you have not registered but would like to do so, you can find more information about that webinar on our website. So just very briefly, the Aspen Institute, which is where the Stevens Initiative is housed, is a pass-through entity for federal funds that come from the US Department of State. And what this means is that all federal guidelines governing the Aspen Institute's agreement with the State Department flow down to our grant recipients. The governing guidelines for your budget and your proposal to the Stevens Initiative are in the Office of Management and Budget's Uniform Guidance for Federal Award Management. The two sections of the Code of Federal Regulations that are listed in the slide that you're looking at right now, 2 CFR 200 and 2 CFR 600, outline budgetary guidance, allowable costs, indirect costs, as well as any specific principles associated with Department of State funds. So you may wish to familiarize yourself with these regulations, particularly if your organization has never received a federal award before. Generally though, in order for costs to align with federal guidelines, all costs in the budget should align with the proposed activities that are outlined in your proposal and must be allowable per these federal guidelines that I just mentioned. They should also be reasonable, and so they should be able to stand up to public scrutiny that, yes, this seems like a reasonable cost to conduct the proposed work. And similarly, they must be allocable and necessary to conduct the proposed work. Just very briefly, and again, we'll get more into this in the budget webinar, but a few unallowable costs, include alcohol, entertainment costs, advertising, unless that advertising is used for recruiting for your program, or projects designed to advocate for policy views. Again, very brief overview, and we'll look forward to talking to you about this more during our webinar on budget and compliance on August 27th. To kind of close out our presentation portion of this webinar, we've listed out in this slide support for applicants. Like I just mentioned, we're hosting a webinar on budget and compliance on August 27th. We are not sharing the PowerPoint presentation that we have just run through today, but a recording of both this webinar and the upcoming budget webinar will be posted on the Stevens Initiative's YouTube channel. We also have on SurveyMonkey Apply, which is our application platform, a PDF of frequently asked questions that you can download and take a look at. You might want to take a look at that. I imagine that some of the questions you may have, if you haven't seen this document already, could be in that document. And we are updating that document as we receive questions from prospective applicants. We also have on SurveyMonkey Apply a PDF of general feedback on past applications, which may be helpful as you're thinking about putting a proposal together. And lastly, the Stevens Initiative also offers a lot of different resources, which are listed under the Resources tab of our website. Lastly, you can contact us if you have any questions at stevensinitiative@aspeninstitute.org. You can send us questions if you have any prior to submitting an application. And so I will turn it back over to you, Henry.
Thank you so much, Andy. And I think you and Kyle and I, if we would be ready, could go on video and get ready for the question and answer portion of the session. I want to start by apologizing, Andy, if I missed the misspoke the date of the webinar, but you correctly restated it a few times. So thank you so much for that. I also want to speak to the first question here from our Q&A box. And again, if you have any other questions, please type them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. The first one is, online, it says that the anticipated grant size range for seeding grants is between $50,000 and $150,000, while the slide says 50 to 100. Which is the number to go with? Thank you so much for pointing this out. This was an error that I introduced in making the slides. The correct range is $50,000 to $150,000 over that 15-month period of performance. So the call for proposals on SurveyMonkey Apply is correct, and the number I put on the slide is incorrect. So the real limit for seeding grants is not $100,000, but $150,000. And we'll make sure to convey that not only which is already conveyed in the call for proposals, but also in the video recording so that people aren't confused by what they see in the slide. So I'm really sorry for that mistake. The next question is, can applicants from the MENA region only be NGOs or non-governmental organizations? I'll flip back to what we have in our notes about who applicants can be. To get this, make sure I say this somewhat correctly. We said MENA region-based applicants must be nonprofit organizations, including educational institutions that can demonstrate current in-country registration. We know that different countries and systems have different ways of characterizing organizations. And so if you have any questions about the specific status of your organization, please get in touch with us and we can have a conversation about any details that this might not address. But typically we expect non-governmental or nonprofit organizations, including education institutions. The next question is, can you please explain further the concept of cost per participant? This is a tricky question because different organizations might have a different perspective on what this means to them. For our purposes, for the purposes of this competition, what we mean when we say cost per participant is the total amount of money being requested from the Stevens Initiative divided by the number of young people who will participate in the program and achieve the level of meaningful participation. We get into more detail about what we mean by that in the call for proposals, but basically what we mean is the number of young people who will actually participate in the program. So taking that total requested budget number and dividing it by the number of actual participants in the program. That number has to be within the range that we specify for the 3 award types for each of those awards. The next question is, if the participants are under 18, do the same rules apply regarding participant notification and sharing their information? Kyle, could you maybe speak to that a little bit? I'm sorry, I didn't prompt you at first. Again, the question is, if participants are under age 18, do the same rules apply regarding participant notification and information sharing?
Thanks for the question, Henry, and for whoever put it in the chat. I think this is a complicated question. I think our bottom line is yes. We expect all of our grantees to follow these expectations regarding definitely participant notification that they are participating in a program that is sponsored by the Stevens Initiative and the U.S. Department of State and the partners that come with the Stevens Initiative. And also we expect that our grantees will also follow the expectations outlined about sharing contact data with us. And we expect that those grantees would then create a program including all like the appropriate privacy waivers or permissions from parents to help facilitate that contact data transfer. If this raises significant problems or flags for the organization that's developing this proposal, people should feel free to reach out to us at the Stevens Initiative email address, stevensinitiative@aspeninstitute.org, and we can have discuss maybe an individual issue with that organization.
Thanks, Kyle. The next question is it necessary to coordinate with any organizations in the United States for submitting a shared initiative? A couple points in response to this question. It's a little hard to give an exact answer without knowing the circumstances of the applicant, but there has to be one organization that is submitting the proposal as the prime applicant. And typically, if the applicant is based in the United States, then it makes sense in many cases to partner with organizations in the MENA region. If the prime applicant is based in the MENA region, they often are partnering with a US-based organization. One of them will have to be the prime applicant and the others will have to be partners of some kind, whether it's subcontractors or subgrantees or some other status like that. So we've also, to be clear, we've also seen some proposals that don't have any partners of this nature because the applying organization is able to conduct all the work, although that is quite rare. So if you have further questions, please do follow up with us. The next question is, do we have a target number of awardees by grant type? We have not listed any target numbers of awardees by grant type. We look forward to making several grants of each type, and it will also depend on the proposals that are submitted and the other kinds of priorities that they might reach. So it's really premature for us to say, unfortunately. I think it is fair to say that applicants would be well served by proposing a program that speaks to their strengths rather than trying to think about where there will be more or less competition. There's a question, can you give an example of a program? The best place to learn more about virtual exchange programs as far as the Stevens Initiative is concerned is to go to the Stevens Initiative website, stevensinitiative.org, and I think it's the Projects tab. Someone should correct me if I've misstated that. And there you can see the list of many past Stevens Initiative grantees with descriptions of their programs. You can find stories about people who've participated in those programs. There are also many other programs out there in the world with a wide variety of types and communities they've reached and outcomes. But looking at the Stevens Initiative grant list through the Projects tab is a good place to start. I'm scrolling through the questions here. Do we have to be a nonprofit organization to apply, or can we apply as individuals? The answer is yes, you do have to be affiliated with an eligible organization to apply for a grant. The burdens on the grant recipient to carry out this work are substantial, given that we have to flow down federal requirements, and we have found that it's important that that be a qualified organization that has all of the practices in place to appropriately conduct that work. Andy, there's a question here. Is, quote, language learning limited to English?
Yeah, a couple of things to address this question. No, it doesn't necessarily need to be limited to English. What would be reasonable would be programs that would propose language learning for a language in the Middle East and North Africa as well. So a program might be English language practice for participants in a country in the Middle East and North Africa. But we've also funded programs that support Farsi, French, Arabic, Kurdish, several of the different languages that are spoken across the Middle East and North Africa. So those languages that are spoken there can also be an appropriate addition to your program.
Andy, here's another question for you. Would the Stevens Initiative consider applications or projects just beyond the MENA region, even if the MENA US region would be a significant part of the program?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And Henry, you should add on if I don't answer this sufficiently, but the answer is that this is not expressly unallowed. It does get a little bit complicated when a program is proposing participants outside of the Middle East and North Africa, because our funding, the Stevens Initiative's funding, cannot support participants that are outside of the Middle East and North Africa. The other thing that I want to mention about this is that if you do propose a program that includes participants outside of the Middle East and North Africa, and you've agreed, that our funding will not support those participants, you still need to ensure that the program that we are funding includes MENA US communication and exchange. So if you had, a third or fourth country and you had Americans speaking with people from, say, Mexico, that would still not be eligible, even if you were including participants from a Middle East and North Africa country. There would need to be that US MENA dialogue and exchange.
We know this frequently comes up for organizations that run programs in many parts of the world. So again, if you have any questions about this, please do email us to make sure that you understand how Stevens Initiative funding can be used in branding, and also how serious it is for us that all participants we fund need to have that US MENA region engagement. So don't hesitate to follow up. It's an important component. The next question is, will the grant allow support of mobile phone minutes for participants? Excuse me, I apologize. Will the grant allow support of mobile phone minutes for participants or other means of financing individual youth participants? Andy, can you speak to that? What kind of costs are allowable to support communication?
Yeah, the answer is that yes, we can support data costs or minute costs or Wi-Fi costs to the extent that it is appropriate and necessary for your participants to be included and engage with the program. We encourage you to consider a feasible way in order to distribute these payments. We can support your organization, for example, purchasing hotspots and loaning those out to participants. We can support a stipend for data or for minutes. So we encourage you to think about what a appropriate mechanism of delivery would be for your participants.
Changing gears a bit, Kyle, the next question is about the process. Are applicants able to save the application as a work in progress and come back to it to update it as they go along and finalize?
Yeah, this is a really good question. The SurveyMonkey Apply platform is pretty versatile, and so an applicant can start an application, can edit it, can save, can close, can come back and open it later, edit it again. And this editing process can keep happening repetitively all the way until the application is fully submitted. So until you've clicked that final submit button and the platform asks you multiple times, are you sure you want to commit? Here's an opportunity to review and that kind of thing. Until you fully submit, the application is fully editable. One note that I would like to share is that the application is divided into sections or pages. And so sometimes to see a page after the one that you're currently on, you might need to put a filler like not now or NA or something like that, some text as a response to specific questions. So you can keep going forward in the application to see what might come next, but you can always come back and edit that again before you fully submit. If applicants would like to see what the application looks like, we have PDFs on the call for proposals that you can download as an example. So you can look and see, oh, this is exactly all of the questions and all of the requests for information that are included in the application before you'd even start to create an account with SurveyMonkey Apply or to start filling out an application. So you don't even have to start an application before you can see all the questions. They're there as PDFs on our website. And there are examples for each of the grant types, since each type, scaling, efficiency, and seating, all have some unique questions.
Thanks very much. The next question is there an applicant minimum operating budget to be eligible to apply? And the answer is yes. The minimum operating budget is stated in relative terms, and I strongly encourage you to go into SurveyMonkey Apply to see how those work for the different grant types, because they are different for the scaling awards and for the seating and efficiency awards. Basically, an organization has to have an operating budget that is a certain size larger than the amount of money they are requesting from the Stevens Initiative, so the Stevens Initiative does not become too large a portion of their work to be appropriate. We'll get into more about that in the next webinar on August 27th, but briefly, yes, please look at the call for proposals to see more about the minimum operating budget. This is a common barrier and a common issue with many applicants who don't meet that threshold, and we regret that we're not able to support those organizations, but it is through our hard-earned experience that this is a necessary threshold that we set. There's a question here, maybe for Andy. Do I understand correctly that the proposal can be intra-MENA exchange only with eligible countries, not including the US, and there's no negative points for that? I'm sorry, Andy, I just want to make sure I think I understand the question right, and I just want to make sure I get it right rather than, it's this tricky wording that I'm looking at on the screen. The question is, can it be intra-MENA region exchange only and not including the United States? And the answer is no, that would not be eligible. The exchange would have to include participants both from the United States as well as from the MENA region. And those people need to be engaging with each other for it to qualify as a meaningful international virtual exchange, meeting our guidelines from the Department of State. So these are US MENA region exchanges. They can include intra-MENA exchange as well as a component of the program, and we've seen some phenomenal programs that include that, but those participants would also need to be engaging with Americans in order to qualify under the Stevens Initiative. Sorry about that, Andy. The next question is, my university generally conducts virtual exchange at no cost to either our students or partners and makes of university-funded technology. Can you give me a sense of what prior applicants have used the budget for? Stipends and/or honoraria? Andy, when you talk about some common expenses, do you think you could also say a word about this question about providing the exchange at no cost to participants?
Yeah, I can try to answer this question. I think generally there is always some kind of a cost associated with implementing virtual exchange, even if that's just an individual's salary and their staff time. So personnel expenses, salary expenses are eligible to be included in a budget. If you are, for example, offering some kind of a training or a professional development opportunity, or if you're electing to send your faculty to an external training, costs associated with that training, whether that's kind of a travel stipend or costs associated with implementing a training, those are also eligible. If there are subscription costs like Canvas or Moodle or Blackboard, some kind of a learning management system that has costs associated with it for your virtual exchange or even Zoom, those are eligible costs to put on your budget. I'm trying to think if there's anything else really glaring. If there's any traveling that your faculty are doing, assuming that the state of the world resumes, to a sense of normalcy at some point. If there's travel that's happening to meet counterparts or to visit a partnering institution to refine the curriculum, for example, that's also an eligible cost. This is not an exhaustive list, but maybe that kind of helps illustrate some of the costs associated with these programs.
Thanks, Andy. The next question is actually several questions that we've gotten now about whether organizations can submit more than one proposal. Can they submit more than one proposal across the different types? Can they submit more than one proposal within one type? Generally, we take a hands-off approach on this, and organizations are allowed to submit proposals with a few guidelines in mind. Organizations should only submit proposals they can realistically carry out, and they should only submit proposals that they can realistically carry out even if all of the applications were accepted. So 2 proposals where they're very, very similar, they to do very similar work, and they're only different in little ways, those are not sufficiently different to be both submitted, because if both of them were accepted, then the work couldn't be conducted. So we do urge organizations to only submit proposals that if all of them were accepted, that they could all be conducted. They all have to be different. Those are some guidelines. So we do urge organizations to think carefully about what's feasible and to really put forward their best idea or best ideas, but there is no strict limit to only one proposal. Andy, did I say that okay? Anything to clean up there? Okay.
Sounds great.
We have a few questions about the age limit. Is the 35-year-old age limit a hard limit? And then there's a question about, what about graduate students? Andy, can you speak to this question about age limits?
Yeah, a couple things about age limits. Generally, we intend for our programming to be intended for young people. And so that's why we've added that 35 numbers, 35 and under, those are the young people in our programming. We understand that in certain contexts, particularly in a university or a community college context, if you are proposing a program that is a virtual exchange between courses, there may be non-traditional students in those courses, and they may be older than 35. We do not want to exclude, 1 or 2 people from a course-based exchange. So, there are those kinds of exceptions that might be reasonable. If you are proposing a program that's kind of an open enrollment program where you have young people from either all over or from a specific or specified partners or countries applying to your program, that sounds like an instance in which you would want to enforce the 35-year-old age limit because you have the control over who you're bringing into the program. But if you're in a university context with non-traditional students, assuming that this is not necessarily the majority of your participants, this seems like a reasonable exception. Did I characterize that okay, Henry?
Thumbs up. Andy, the next question, maybe also for you, is can we submit a, quote, consortium proposal, or does it have to be from an individual organization?
I can try to answer that. I think the answer is that ultimately the award needs to go to one specific organization. So we cannot have multiple agreements with multiple organizations that are part of the same program. We would only be able to give an award to one specific organization, and then we would assume that that organization would either use subawards or contracts with their other partner organizations. So generally, coming in with a big group of partners for a proposal is allowable. But as far as the structure goes, we would only be able to issue one prime agreement.
And it sounds like we might get into that a bit more during the next webinar on August 27th, but I definitely want to reinforce what you're saying that yes, it's one applying organization for the project, but we do definitely encourage organizations to work together and determine what the different roles will be of those players in one collaborative process. Thank you so much for that question. A question here, again, maybe for Andy from her experience. Can a university be awarded a grant to work with a high school population?
Yes, we have seen proposals and we have funded proposals that are like this. We've had two different structures. One is in which a university proposes to just work with high schools in their communities. And so the program is being implemented and run by the university or someone at a university, but isn't necessarily involving university-age students. And then on the other side of that, we have seen proposals that involve both university-age students as well as high school students who, may be at high schools in the communities where the universities are located. The only thing that I will say about that is if that's a model that you're proposing, we encourage you to think about safe dialogue between possible minors and adults, as well as activities and content that would resonate with both of these age groups.
We have a question here basically asking, do we prefer proposals that aim to reach many countries, or you could even ask many US states? Or do we prefer countries, or is it okay to submit a proposal to reach maybe just one MENA region country and maybe a small part of the United States? From our history, I think it's fair to say that we've supported proposals of both of these types. Proposals can be large or small, really irrespective of the number of countries or states they reach. We've had very large proposals to reach a very specific region, and very small proposals that might have reached multiple countries. We don't really have a preference specifically regarding the number of countries or states. The proposal should reflect a thoughtful approach to how participants will be reached and why different places are being included, and it should all seem feasible and reasonable. But beyond that, there is no specific priority, aside from some of those country priorities that we mentioned, or other participant priorities we mentioned in the call for proposals that Kyle spoke to. Kyle, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the feedback for past applicants, because we have a question here asking if folks can see earlier proposals. And while we don't make proposals available, we do have this feedback document.
Yeah, that's a great question, Henry, and I'm going to use it to give some more detail about all of the resources we posted for applicants. So yes, there is a document on listed on the call for proposals that is a resource to any potential applicant in which we detail some feedback that proposals received from the review committee for previous competitions. So for every competition that the Stevens Initiative has done, we have empaneled an independent review committee to help us evaluate and score those applications. And so what we did on the Stevens Initiative, we took a lot of that feedback that different proposals have received and compiled it into a general document. So not about a specific application that we've received before, but it compiles like general feedback that maybe many previous proposals have received. And so we compiled that and published it so that applicants for this specific competition can use that to help them learn maybe what the perspective is of our reviewers and the initiative. We should say that that feedback is based on prior competitions, and each competition is different in its contours or in the regulations or the scope. And so it shouldn't be construed as a perfect advice for creating a perfect proposal, but it should be useful feedback. And the feedback document is only one resource we provided. We provided a really great FAQ document that Andy mentioned earlier and that we will keep updating that really answers a lot of the questions that we've talked about today, such as participants in third countries, or a lot of the questions about finance or budgets. And so I would encourage everyone to use all of those resources that we've listed, including the feedback document, including the FAQ and this webinar to answer those questions.
I'm going to try to cover just a couple more because time is running out and we don't want to go over time, and we want to leave a moment to just reiterate what comes next. One is, can staff be over the age of 35? So program staff. And the answer is yes. Another question is about stipends and whether participants and youth can receive stipends. That's a bit complicated and probably bears more discussion, and does seem like something that will probably come up during the August 27th webinar. So we strongly encourage you to join us then. Another one gets to something that I want to return to, which goes to the nature of the invitational priorities. There's a question here about whether open enrollment programs are really suitable for all populations, especially students who are very busy with their lives outside of education and would be best served by a program through education. And to clarify, while we are interested in supporting some programs that are open enrollment programs that happen outside of an educational setting, we are very open to proposals that occur for programs that occur within 4-credit academic settings. And so you shouldn't feel dissuaded or disincentivized for putting forward those proposals either. I think it's a good time to wrap up. I see in the Q&A box something I've never seen before, which is a 99+ number for the number of questions that have been submitted. And our team, including some of those you see on the screen here, including Haley and Phoebe, have been working so hard behind the scenes to get us questions that are going to cover as broad a range of topics as possible. But we certainly haven't been able to get to all of them. And I know some of you have raised hands, and we understand there are many more questions out there. So if we could put the slide back up that shows what comes next. I want to remind you that the application deadline is October 13th of this year, 2020, at 5 p.m. US Eastern Time. The application website is stevensinitiative.smapply.io or SurveyMonkey Apply. We have our next webinar on August 27th on budget and compliance questions. So you can sign up using the events page of the Stevens Initiative website. And I think if we click to the last slide, you'll be able to see our email address, stevensinitiative@aspeninstitute.org, which is the best place to send any questions related to the competition. If you have any questions at any time, please email us there and we'll do our best to get back to you. So you can check out our website to learn more about programs, email us, attend the next webinar, and again, we'll post a recording of this webinar online soon. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are so grateful for your interest and we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you very much.